Hollywood. It sells us these incredible dreams, right? Epic adventures, huge romances, stories that are just larger than life. But you know, behind all that glamour, behind the billions of dollars, there's a much darker side. A history of on-set tragedies so shocking, they've basically become legends. And that leads to this one question that just keeps getting whispered around.
You've heard the stories, I'm sure. Productions that seem to be plagued by just bad luck. Mysterious deaths, bizarre accidents, this feeling that something is just wrong. Is it possible that something supernatural is actually at play? Or is the real story something far, far more disturbing?
Okay, let's start with The Exorcist. During production, a fire just breaks out. It burns the entire set to the ground, but one single room was mysteriously, almost miraculously spared. Any guesses? Yep, Regan's bedroom. The very center of all the demonic chaos in the film. The crew is so freaked out they literally had a priest come in to bless the new set.
And then you have Poltergeist. For that absolutely iconic swimming pool scene, well, the production team did the math and figured out it was actually cheaper to use real human skeletons from a medical supply company than to make plastic ones. Here's the kicker, though. They didn't tell the actors. They thought they were swimming around the fake props. The truth only came out after the scene was already shot.
And that one creepy fact, it became the fuel for the whole legend of the Poltergeist curse. Because in the 6 years after that first film came out, 4 of the cast members died. And tragically, this included the young star Heather O'Rourke, who was only 12 years old. I mean, it all seems to point to one pretty terrifying conclusion, doesn't it?
Well, maybe not. Because when you start to look past all the eerie coincidences, when you dig into the actual records, the legal documents, a very different story starts to take shape. And honestly, it's a story that is way more chilling than any ghost. I mean, think about it. Calling a film cursed is, well, it's convenient, isn't it? It makes for a great spooky story, sure, but it also lets everyone off the hook. It suggests that these awful things happened because of a demon or some angry spirit, when the evidence, the real evidence, shows they were caused by something much more ordinary, human error, and sometimes straight-up negligence.
And there is no greater or more tragic example of this than the disaster that happened on the set of Twilight Zone, the movie. This wasn't a curse. This was a catastrophe, born from a whole series of reckless decisions that ended up costing 3 people their lives. 3 people. Veteran actor Vic Morrow and 2 little kids, 7-year-old Micah Denley and 6-year-old Renee Shinyi Chen. They were killed instantly when a helicopter, which was flying way too low and was damaged by special effects explosions, just crashed right on top of them.
And when the investigation started, what they found was just a staggering list of failures. The children were on set at 2:30 in the morning, a clear violation of child labor laws. The production never even got the permits required to have them there. And they set off massive live explosives directly under a helicopter, even after crew members had warned them that the stunt was just too dangerous.
And yet, despite this mountain of evidence, this clear case of gross negligence, the director, John Landis, and 4 others were all found not guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Nobody was held criminally responsible for the deaths of a man and 2 small children.
Now, you'd think a tragedy that horrific would change the industry forever. And it did for a while. New safety rules were put in place. But the thing about Hollywood is that this cycle of tragedy, it has a terrible way of repeating itself. We saw it happen again with 2 of the most infamous on-set shootings in history.
So in 1993, Brandon Lee, son of the legendary Bruce Lee, was killed by an improperly prepared prop gun while he was filming The Crow. Then, almost 30 years later, in 2021, cinematographer Helena Hutchins was killed by a prop gun on the set of the movie Rust. 2 different movies, decades apart, but the exact same tragic outcome.
And when you actually break it down, the parallels are just horrifying. In both situations, a fatal shooting on set. In both cases, the cause was live ammunition somehow ending up on set and getting mixed in with the blanks. That is a cardinal sin of firearm safety. And in both cases, the root cause was a complete breakdown in following basic safety protocols, which means both of these deaths were entirely preventable.
So what is going on here? Why does this keep happening? Well, it's because these aren't just isolated accidents, and they're definitely not supernatural curses. They are symptoms of a much deeper, systemic problem within the very culture of making movies.
The real culprits? They're not ghosts. They're things like intense budget pressure. On smaller films, corners get cut,
And the first corner that usually gets cut is safety. Then there's lax oversight from producers who might be more focused on finishing on time than on anything else. And finally, you have inexperienced crew being hired for critical safety jobs, like armorers, all just to save a few bucks.
So these tragedies, they become the predictable outcome of this kind of system, a system that, for decades, has often treated safety not as a moral imperative, but as a line item on a budget, something you can minimize to protect the bottom line.
And this leads to this absolutely devastating cycle. First, a preventable death happens. Second, the public is, rightfully, outraged. Third, the industry is forced to act and they write new safety rules. And then, step 4, years go by, memories fade, budget pressures mount on some new movie set, and those hard-won rules get ignored. And the whole cycle starts all over again.
You know, after Helena Hutchins was killed, the industry's own union, IATSE, they released this incredibly powerful statement. It gets right to the heart of it. Her death wasn't a freak accident. It was predictable. The industry knew exactly what could happen because it had already happened to Brandon Lee. They had rules to prevent it, but on that set, on that day, those rules just weren't followed.
So the next time you hear a story about a cursed movie set, maybe the question we should be asking isn't about whether there was a ghost lurking around. Maybe the real question is, who was in charge, what corners were cut to save money, and who should actually be held responsible for what happened?